All right, should be good. Hopefully everyone can see everything and hear me. So without further ado, good morning, everyone. My name is Ken Winner, and my talk will be on Goodbye YAML, Hello AWS Cloud Development Kit. So originally I had something a little more tongue-in-cheek, like Goodbye CloudFormation, Long Live CloudFormation. So the AWS Cloud Development Kit will actually synthesize a CloudFormation template for you, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So a little about me. As I said, I'm Ken Winner. I am the CTO over at Voxy Inc. We are a small little startup doing some media services and technology stuff. If you want to check us out, I am an AWS Solutions Architect Pro, and I am a drinker of the serverless Kool-Aid. So pretty much everything I do focuses on serverless applications if and when feasible and available. What are we going to cover today? So our agenda is, what is the CDK? That way people can understand, why are we even choosing the CDK? Why am I here to listen about the CDK? Why do I care? What features it offers, what things I like about it, what it has to offer you. A short little demo to cover initialization, setting up an active-active API using a Lambda API gateway, which means that it's in 2 regions and you can hit it from either region and return the same data. And then we're just going to kind of circle back on the things that I like about it, the things that I don't like about it, because no system is perfect, and then any questions that you have and where to follow up. So let's start with, what is the CDK? CDK is an AWS cloud native offering to allow you to stand up infrastructure and resources in Amazon Web Services. So you can create and provision those resources, you can update those resources, and you can delete those resources. It's created by AWS and maintained by folks, also open source. So if you see anything that you need changed or want to look at stuff, you can go to GitHub and check things out. And it allows you to define your resources in a familiar programming language. So CloudFormation, you can use JSON or you can use YAML. And those don't really give you any sort of native programming flows, right? You can have some functions and statements that they have built in, but it doesn't provide things like an if loop or a for loop, right? Stuff like that. It's not really available to you. So this allows you to set up basic programming workflow, and you can teach people things that they already know. So you can do JavaScript, you can do TypeScript, C#, Java, and Python. So here you can see the supported languages. There are currently 5. Moving on. One of the main features is the context API. So you can use the context to retrieve information about your AWS account. So previously with CloudFormation and setting up resources, you couldn't maintain or make changes or access information other than parameters that you pass in. And that was kind of frustrating. So Terraform had some options to help you out with that, but it wasn't maintained and built by AWS, and it wasn't native to AWS. We'll take a look at context in a little bit in my demo, because I'm using it to grab a hosted zone for Route 53 that I've already set up, and then it stores that so that we can use it. You can also use it to pass in command line parameters. So here we're setting the stage, the region in the account, and then a table name, and then we're passing those in as environment variables. So if you want to set this up in the CI system and set those those variables on a branch or whatever that looks like, you can use this to do that. SSM. So AWS Systems Manager is my preferred way to pass in secret values to a Lambda, for instance. And also it allows you to pass in parameters to things like an RDS database that you're setting up. So if you look here on this slide, you can see that we're grabbing a secret value, and it's called my secret SSM value. And that's a secure string in the parameter store. So this never gets pushed into the template. It doesn't get echoed. It doesn't get checked in. No one can see that password. You can update the versions if you want to rotate that. And this is something that we started using at my previous job before Secret Manager came out. And it also costs nothing. So Secret Manager is about 40 cents per secret, And it really is only super useful, in my opinion, if you are using it to rotate keys. Here, we don't really care about that. We're just going to use a static key when we set it up, and we're going to move on with our life. Loops. So as I mentioned earlier, CloudFormation has no native way to do a for loop. So in this instance, if we want to set up some Cognito user pool groups, we can set an array with 3 values. We have admins, we have users, and we have guests. And we always want these every time we set up a stack. You know, maybe it's our dev environment or staging, production, whatever. We always want these 3, and we want them to be named the same. So then we can just loop over those and create a resource for them. And this makes it a little bit more readable, in my opinion, because we know what those groups look like. If we want to modify those groups, we know exactly where to go because we're looping over those groups. And then the CFN user pool group down at the bottom is basically just, I would say, almost cruft that kind of goes around our declaration of these groups. If you're doing this in CloudFormation, YAML, JSON, whatever, then you would have to define each group individually. And then the logic kind of just gets confused. Conditions. So if you have used CloudFormation at all, I'm sure you've seen conditions such as an if statement and equals, find and map, different things like that. So here we have is prod, and we're making that our main condition. So we're grabbing that context variable that we set called stage, which maybe it's dev, test, prod, what have you. And then we're just setting a local value for it, is prod. And then at the bottom, we're checking if this is prod, then we want to attach a volume. But otherwise, we don't really want to do that. We don't really care about attaching that volume in development or test. So this is a pretty easily readable way of kind of knowing what we're doing in setting up if it is a prod environment. You can have multiple things in here instead of having to define this condition multiple times or setting it on the resource. So here you can see what that natively looks like in CloudFormation. So you have your mappings, you have your parameters, then you set your condition, and your condition is prod. And then you have this bang equals within a list of ref environment type and then prod. Right, so one, I can never remember these things every single time. And knowing how to do it in my familiar language, whether that's Python, JavaScript, Java, C#, etc., is a lot more familiar to me as a developer and as someone setting up infrastructure. Constructs. So constructs are the basic building blocks of the CDK. This is really the bread and butter of what the CDK has to offer. So a basic construct is a resource. So a Lambda REST API is an API gateway REST API that proxies to a Lambda function. So we don't have to specify any of that stuff. We just know that a construct Lambda REST API is gonna be that. It's not just an API gateway where you have to specify everything. We're able to simply declare Lambda REST API. And then below that, we have ICC regional record. So within this talk and the demo, I named everything ICC for Indy CloudConf to separate stuff out that was mine. So an ICC regional record is something that I've defined here, and we can call that and then pass in the parameters that it's expecting. These constructs allow you to build your own reusable components across your company or project or product, what have you. So you can have these regional records, you can deploy it to your own internal NPM or whatever package manager you use. And then you can use these across all of your teams if you always want a regional record to have these same values or these same configurations. And I think this is a slightly trivial example with these regional records, but maybe something like a Kubernetes cluster or a Fargate service, something like that. You can reuse these components and they can stay static across your team. And it really, really makes it helpful and reusable, kind of as Larry was talking previously. You don't have to rebuild these tools. So that's what I really enjoy about the constructs, and one thing that the CDK can kind of provide that CloudFormation can in some ways, but also it's kind of hairy and unfamiliar. So CloudFormation constructs versus native constructs. So a native construct, in my opinion, to the CDK is something that they have built for the CDK. So at the top here, you have let lambda function equal new function. So a function is a lambda function. We've imported this from the AWS Lambda CDK package, and it's built in a specific CDK opinionated way. It takes these values and then you build it. However, not every resource in AWS has a robust native CDK function. So sometimes you have to actually fall back onto the CloudFormation version, and it's pretty much exactly the same as what you would find when building a CloudFormation YAML or JSON template. So you set the runtime, you set the code with an S3 bucket and S3 key, or however you're going to set it. You can set the handler, and then you set the role, right? So in the Lambda function above, it will actually generate a role for you if you don't pass one in, and it will have the Lambda basic execution. Here in the CloudFormation version, you have to specify that. You can do some AWS SAM transformations and things, but that's beyond the scope of this demo. However, it is available to you. Persuasion is clearly a sort of demonstration, since we are most fully persuaded when we consider a thing to have been demonstrated. So the goal here is to give you a little bit of demo about how to set up the CDK, and then kind of show something that I've already pre-built for you that you can also find in GitHub if you want to test it out and see what things look like. But just to really kind of solidify that idea of why I would want to use the CDK, what does the CDK have to offer me, and where can we go from here? So let's go ahead and pop over here. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look in here, and you can see that this directory is empty. So this directory is called icc-init, and there's nothing in here. So the first thing we want to do, if you're installing this fresh, is actually install the CDK globally. That way you have it on your system. If you want to build it from source or whatever, go ahead and feel free to do that. However, I'm not going to be doing that. And then I use a tool from Trek 10 called Assume. And this lets us make sure that we're using the right credentials that we want to use. So that I have a couple different profiles on this account. So I'm going to use my personal account, and then I want to make sure that I'm using the US West 2 region. So this will set my keys and everything that way. This you don't have to do. You can use whatever profile you want and whatever tooling you have around that. So then we're going to create a sample project. So if we just do CDK init, this will tell us what available templates we have. So we can use an empty app template. If we are trying to build a construct library, we can pass in lib. Or if we want a sample application, which is what we're going to use today, then we can pass in sample app. So let's do CDK init sample-app. And then we're going to set our language to TypeScript, because that is what I would like to use. However, you can see available to you C#, F#, which I did not mention previously, Java, JavaScript, Python, and TypeScript. So here it's setting up our application for us. And once it is complete, I will go ahead and open this up. So it gives us a little bit of information on useful commands and things that are available to us. So let's go ahead and pop this up right here. And here we go. So this is a basic templated stack set up for you. So in our bin for our TypeScript, we have icc-init. It names everything by default the same as what your directory is. So we are importing the CDK core, and then our init stack, which it creates for us here down in the lib folder. And then it declares an app, and then it creates a new stack, passing in that app. So let's go ahead and jump into here and see what it created for us. So it brings in AWS SNS. It brings in SNS subscriptions, SQS, and core. As I said, this isn't my template. This is a basic sample application that is created for you. Here we can see the cdk.json. You can declare some different values in here to kind of set up your project. And then it has a basic README with functions that you can call. So CDK deploy, CDK diff if you want to compare it with the current state, and then CDK synth. So here we're going to use CDK synth and see what this template would look like. here it generates this beautiful, hardly readable in the console if you don't pass anything in. So let's redo this and call template.yaml. So it will pass that in, and now we can take a look at our template. So it takes all of those functions and constructs and then pushes everything to a CloudFormation template for you. And then when you deploy, it will deploy this template. But if you want to read everything prior, you can look through here, things like that. So this is a basic template and how to set it up. But since I pre-built the other demo, we're going to go ahead and take a look at my functions and what I've built. So here we have our demo, and we're building 3 stacks. So we have a global table stack that I've built, and this will create a Dynamo table replicated between US East 2 and US West 2. Then we're creating an API stack in US East 2. Here we're passing in our region. And then we're creating another one in US West 2. So let's jump into this table. Pretty simple here. We're just creating a DynamoDB table. So here you can see new table, which is imported from DynamoDB. We're setting the billing mode to whatever we want above. The table name, the partition key is super awesome called PK, and then our replication regions. So our replication regions, we don't actually want to set the region we are deploying from. So the replication region is only set to US West 2. Otherwise, this will throw an error, which I've commented up here. That is not clear. And that is one of the things that I do not love about the CDK is sometimes the errors can be a little unclear. So going back to here, we take this global stack, and then we're passing that stack as a parameter into our other two stacks that we're deploying. So here in the API stack, we are creating a Lambda function, as you can see, new function. And then that function, we want to grant read-write access to our table. So we're taking that previous stack, we're calling the table, and then we're granting that read-write permission to the Lambda function. So instead of building the role and saying resource this and making those policies, these built-in CDKs constructs can provide some of those values to us. And that's another thing that makes this a little more friendly and easier to use. Here we're grabbing the hosted zone that I have from lookup, kennethwinner.com. We're creating a DNS cert for it. And then we're setting up a Lambda REST API. And then this construct I built called ICC regional record. Let's jump over to that record really quickly. So I have these props that I want to pass in. I want to pass in that hosted zone that we grab, the API, the region, and the domain name. So since this is a regional API and regional record, we want a health check. That way we know if it's failing over or not. And so this allows us to build that the same way every time. So this resource path, maybe we would want to be configurable, whatever it is for our different services. Here, I'm just making it static health check. And then we create a CFN record set. So global demo, and then we're grabbing the zone name, we're setting the region, and all of these different values. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So we can synthesize this stack into our YAML template. And, so since we do have multiple stacks, it wants us to declare which stack we want to synthesize. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the global API 1 dev. So here we are, we have our template and everything comes out with these Dynamo delete items, etc. This is what I was talking about when we grab that grant read write and allow access. And it sets up the Amazon resource name for us. We have our functions, our records, everything is in here. But we don't really have to care about that. We can just call CDK deploy and deploy just that one stack. We could deploy all of our stacks. You can determine which one you want. But it's not going to make any changes because I've already got this deployed. So let's go ahead and come over here and see what this looks like. So when you initially create a project, you want to make sure that the region is bootstrapped. Calling CDK bootstrap will set up a stack for you with an S3 bucket for things to be deployed into and what have you. So here's our other global API 2, and this is in the Oregon region, which is US West 2. So this has already been deployed. You can see we've got our table over here. We've got it's set as a global table. We've got East Ohio, West Oregon, and then we've got one value in here called test key 1 and demo 1. We've also got an API gateway set up in Oregon as well. We've got an invoke URL, and it's set up as a proxy. Moving along, you can see we've got some CloudWatch logs here, and the health check is running constantly. Here you can see the resources, and it keeps getting called over and over and over. And then here we're just calling the URL for US West 2 directly and calling this examples API that I built. So all it does is it scans our global table, returns the keys, how many were scanned, the region in which this was called, and then the host for that. So the reason I did this is to show two things. So we can see exactly what it looks like in West. And then when we call our global demo kennethwinner.com examples, here you can see that the region is US East 2 because I'm closer to that region. So that's where I'm getting routed. Now, if we want to go ahead and break that, we can come over to our health check and let's just call throw in here, and then we'll go ahead and redeploy this. So what this is going to do now is deploy to the US East 2 region, and now our health check is going to end up failing. And once it fails, our global and regional stack will fail over to the US West 2 DNS. Here you can see the output of what's being published. It's pushing everything to S3 and then deploying the stacks from there. This shouldn't take too long, but creates a change set. We'll show you what has been deployed, if it needs to roll back, if it needs to update, what's been done. It gives you those statuses, and then it gives you these outputs. So here's the output for our US East region. If we want to go over there, take a look. We don't want to hit the root. We want to hit examples. And it's failing because it's not going to be healthy. So we need to give this a little bit of time so that the health check will fail. And then eventually, I promise, this will fail over to US West 2. So coming back in here, this is just a simple API with a little simple router that I built. So we're routing the event, and then when we return, I just always wanted to add the region and the host for this so that we could see where it's coming from. And then if it doesn't work, we just return a status code 500. Example, just scanning the table, logging that out. And then here, we're throwing this health check because we're failing every time. While this is still waiting to fail, I'll go ahead and show you the CDK context. So previously I mentioned that you can bring resources in that are already in your account. So I have this hosted zone and the account and all this information in here. And this, when we call that from lookup, it stores those values in here. That way that it can reuse it when it's creating your stack. So you can do this for VPCs, security groups. Many of the resources have a from lookup value that you can use natively without having to pass in any parameters or people having to know what those are, as long as they exist either in the account or it has access to it. Let's go ahead and see if our resources failed over. So it is now unhealthy. And when we rerun this, we should get routed to US West 2, and it's broken. So that's great. Not exactly what we want to see. However, imagine that this failed over to US West 2 and was working perfectly. Anyway, that is pretty much it for the demo. Again, if you have questions, I'm not really sure why this isn't working right this second. However, if you have questions, we can follow up after, and I can once again show that. So things that I don't love, the CDK can be a bit opinionated in what it will allow you to do. So for instance, you can't deploy Lambda functions into public subnets, even though you can do it in the console, you can do it in CloudFormation, it simply won't let you. The reason is because they can't access resources from a public Lambda, however, or public subnet, but it should at least allow you to override that functionality if you want to, in my opinion. And sometimes that pops up in a couple other places. You often have to fall back on CloudFormation resources instead of native constructs. So while this isn't horrible, some of those awesome features aren't necessarily already built in. This is still being created. Some of the resources are even in a beta version. And then another thing that has gotten to me is the unclear errors. So sometimes it won't necessarily tell you where an error is coming from, what's wrong, and you kind of have to dig in and figure things out on your own. Things that I do love, it's code defined. So it's not just YAML or JSON. You can use TypeScript, JavaScript, et cetera, et cetera. Reusable constructs throughout your application. It's readable. You get code completion. You can import existing resources through context, and you can execute code that isn't CloudFormation. So for instance, if you want to store something in SSM, then you can create that in the app section, and then you can pass those values in. You can do a lot of different things. I'm actually working on a plugin where you can transform your GraphQL statements, similar to the way the Amplify library does for you. But you could do that in CDK if you wanted to manage those resources that way. So there are a lot of things that are available to you here that you can just do in the same project without having to write scripts or other applications for. So if you have any questions, I will be around. I will hop into the breakout session. I'm available on Twitter, LinkedIn, in the Slack, really wherever you need. I'll go ahead and hand this over to Josh, and then we can see if there are any questions.